Hi, welcome to today's webinar on rubric-based grading in Engrade. My name is Alex Thompson. I'm the account manager for Fremont for Engrade, and I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Bleckinger, who's helping out with the webinar today. So to get started, I just want to establish something right out. What Fremont refers to as rubric-based grading is commonly referred to within Engrade as standards-based grading. So today I will try to use rubric-based grading as much as I can, but I will probably end up defaulting to standards-based grading. And in a sense, that's very appropriate because you'll find that within Engrade, we often use the term standard within the site, the website itself. So just for your purposes, when you're using Engrade, just think standards-based grading and rubric-based grading are the same thing. Here's our overall agenda today. Big picture, what I'd like to do in the next 45 minutes to an hour is take you through the process of creating assessments for students in Engrade to record their standard scores, how they're doing on standards, and how to view the results of that, and how all of those grades pipe through Engrade from the standards-based gradebook into the report card. So here are the sub-steps of that. So we're pretty much done with introductions. I'm going to give you a quick slide on how to get help, and then we'll talk about, I'll show you an overview of standard-based grading. I'll show you how to set up your gradebook. We'll discuss how to add assessments. We'll take a second look at the gradebook once you've seen how you add assessments. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about report cards. So really important, when you need to get help, here's how you get it. You've got Danielle Gerard at Fremont at the central office is the instructional lead for Engrade. You see her email here, dgerard@fremont.k12.ca.us. So she's a good person to contact for help with Engrade. And in addition to that, you have at Engrade, you have a website, support.engrade.com. It's a great website. There's more than 200 articles on the features of Engrade for teachers, and it's searchable. So that's a great place to go. The one caveat with this website is to remember that there's many, many different districts using Engrade, and they use different features, and they even use the same features, for example, standards-based grading, and that there are different settings and there are different configurations. Also, we've got a call-in. You can call us at 1-800-305-1367 between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as well as you can email us at support@engrade.com. If you choose to engage either the phone number or the email, what we'll do is you'll end up talking to a customer service representative, and they'll walk you through how to solve your problem. And they're very, very good at their job. I highly recommend them as a resource. Okay, so let's get into the overview of the standards-based gradebook. The first thing I want you to know is that it's important to know how information gets into Engrade. So I'm going to log into Engrade, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I created a demo account today. It's housed at Joseph Azaveda Elementary School, and for our purposes, I'll be using that sort of fake account today to show you how Engrade works. Now, for those of you who've used Engrade before, I know that most teachers used it last year as a gradebook. This will all seem very familiar, and that's important. What we want you to think about today is that everything that you're doing in Engrade is similar to last year, but it's slightly different in order to do standards-based grading instead of traditional grading. So for all teachers, when you log in, the first thing that you see is your list of active classes. And so here's the thing to know, is that and in each of these classes, you can see I have about 8 students in my classes, small classes. But if I open up that class, it already has my students in there. So the question would be, how do your students get into your classes in Engrade? What's controlling that? How is it that they're already, when you go in to look at your classes, the classes are already there and the students are already in there? And the answer is, every night, very late at night, around midnight or so, Fremont Student Information System sends a file to Engrade that describes where all the students are, where all the teachers are, who's teaching what classes and what students are in those classes, and what schools those classes are at. And then Engrade takes all of that information and interprets it. So on a nightly basis, the information about what students are in what classes gets updated. So it's important to know that, because if you get a new student in your class on Tuesday, right, then as long as they've been added to that student information system on Tuesday, then overnight, Engrade should get that new information about that student, and they should appear in your class by Wednesday. And that's the general rule. Whenever a change happens to your rosters, it should be reflected in Engrade on the next business day. So if it happens on Thursday, it'll be reflected on Friday. If the change happens on Friday, it'll be reflected on Monday. Now, if you ever find yourself in a situation where there's been a change to your class rosters in terms of having a new student or having a student leave, and it's not reflected in Engrade, you're not seeing that change reflected in Engrade, then that's a good time to reach out to Danielle at the district or also potentially us at Engrade. And here's how you do that. The other thing, kind of at a high level, that I want you to know about is if you've used Engrade before, when you're doing traditional grading, you create assignments, you give grades on assignments. Okay, now when you're doing standards-based grading, for all intents and purposes, you want to start thinking of assessments as assignments. So instead of creating a new assignment, we're going to create a new assessment. Instead of putting in assignment scores, we're going to put in assessment scores. You know, our gradebook will consist of assessment scores instead of assignment scores. So if you've used Engrade before, this is the translation that will help you. The other thing I want to review really quickly is the way grades are going to flow through the standards-based gradebook. And we're going to come back to this a few times. You'll get the hang of it, but I'm going to start reminding you of this as we go through the webinar. So the first thing is, the first step to generating student grades in a standards-based grading system is that you assess students on standards. So you give your class an assignment, and perhaps it assesses them on a particular language standard, and then you go and you put those scores into Engrade. Okay, and over time you accrue lots of assessments of the students on different standards. So once you've done that, the student's overall standard score, so their score for a particular standard, is just an average of all the times you've assessed them. So Johnny has been assessed on standard 3.1 5 times. His score for that standard will be an average of those 5 times he was assessed. The next thing we do in Engrade is we calculate a mastery score. And this is per district policy. The district wants that if, say, back to our example of Johnny, if Johnny had a 3.3 for his average standard score, then that corresponds, we round that score down to a 3, and Johnny is considered to have achieved a 3 in that standard. So mastery score is a standard score rounded down. Now, I'll show you this later, but for now, just know that that mastery score gets pulled into the report card. So your report card has all of these places to show how students are doing on individual standards, and what will show there is that mastery score. And then the last step of this process is that to get an overall grade for the subject, say mathematics or the subject reading or the subject language, Engrade takes from the report card all those mastery scores. So maybe there's 4 standards in language, for example. So it takes those 4 mastery scores in language and it averages them to get an overall grade for the subject. So maybe go back to Johnny, he's got a 3, a 2, a 4, and a 3. If you average those out, that's a 3, and that would be his overall grade in language. So we're going to revisit this. You're going to see how this works, but I wanted to start scaffolding the different concepts here. All right, the last thing I want to do before we move into some details is I want to go into a class and show you what the standards-based gradebook looks like. So actually, anytime you get lost in Engrade, you can always reset and go back to where you logged in by clicking this logo. So that's why I just click the logo. So this is where I would land when I log in. And I'm going to show you the language gradebook so you can see what standards looks like in the language gradebook. So I click on my gradebook that I want to look at, and it takes me into my language gradebook. Now, if you've used Engrade before, this is going to look pretty familiar but slightly different. Notice down the left-hand side, we have my 8 students: Annie, Austin, Heidi, Kevin, Natasha, Remy, Richie, Veronica, and I've just given them all the same last name. And then across the top, we have a few different things. So before in the traditional gradebook, you would have assignments here, but instead what you have here are the 4 standards that belong to language. So you see here, FUSD.3.L1, this is the first language standard for Fremont, and it means if we hover over it, it'll tell us what that standard is. Demonstrates command of the conventions of standard English grammar when writing or speaking. And then we've got 3.L2, uses correct mechanics, and so forth. So on the left, students. On the right, above, we have the standards. And then in here, we have the student's mastery score on the standard. So you can take Austin here. He has a 2 on standard 3.L.4, right? And if you hover over his 2, it actually tells you his score is a 2.8, but that's getting rounded down to a mastery score of 2. And it tells you some other stuff here, percent and letter grade, but for our purposes, you should typically ignore those. So that's kind of the overall display, and then 2 other things I want you to take note of here. You have this assessed column. What this assessed column does is it tells you, how many standards that student has been assessed on. So there's 4 standards here in the language gradebook, and Annie has been assessed on all 4 of those standards, so she shows 100% assessed. And actually, in this case, I've assessed all of these students on all 4 standards, so it's showing 100%. But you could imagine if Annie had only been assessed on these 3 standards and not on the 4th standard, then this would actually say 75%, and the bar would only be partially full. So this is a very useful thing to keep track of, especially in a subject with a lot of standards like mathematics. Fremont has many standards. You can go over here and look and see, hey, you know, I'm almost done with trimester 2, and I've only assessed the students on 30% of the standards. That would tell you need to ramp up assessing the other standards. Or you might see that you've assessed students on all the standards, and it's not even halfway through trimester 2, in which case you know you're doing very well. So assessed, and then mastered. Mastered looks at all these standards that the student has been assessed on. So in this case, Annie's been assessed on all 4 standards. It takes a look at all 4 standards that she was assessed on, and it asks how many of those standards did she get a 3 or better on. A 3 is considered mastery, so what you're really trying to see is, did the student master that standard? So Annie here is this great student. She's actually mastered all of these standards, right? But if we go here, we can see that Kevin here has only mastered 50% of the standards. So he mastered this first standard, he mastered the 4th standard, but these 2 middle standards, he hasn't mastered yet. So this is another one to keep track of. It's good for helping you see which students need attention in which areas. So that's kind of the big picture. That's how the standards look once you put them in and you put all your assessments in there and your scores, and Engrade pops out this summary for you, one of a couple different summaries. So it begs the question, let's move to the next part here. Well, we want to add an assessment and to see how we can get these standard scores, but before that, I want to go visit the gradebook settings. We have gone through, for the 8 schools that are doing rubric-based grading, and as well for Ardenwood, who is doing it for 1 grade only, we've gone through and set the settings so that it should facilitate you doing standards-based grading. You should be able to go into your gradebook and start doing standards-based grading right away. However, in case those settings aren't correct, I just want to show you what they should be, and I also want to warn you, don't change certain settings, because if you do, it'll mess things up. So anytime you're in a gradebook, let's go back here. Go back to the classes page. Remember, I clicked that logo anytime I want to get back to where I logged in. So let's go into the math gradebook for a second. Now, interesting, notice how in the math gradebook, we don't have any standards assessed yet. But if I want to go into the math gradebook settings, I go over here to the settings logo, click that, and you'll see a couple different things. So there's a bunch of different settings here. You have your class name, school year, grading period, period of the day. That lock symbol tells you they can't change those. The grade level, the subject area, and the class course. Those are all things that you can change but should not. Just for technical reasons, we can't lock these down, but keep them the way they're set. If you think that there's something wrong with them, that would be a good thing to approach support about or approach Danielle about. You have the option to sort your students in different ways. So you could sort them by first name alphabetically or by ID number. I sort them by last name. You can also choose the name order, how the name is displayed. So Alex Thompson or Thompson Alex. You have some other settings here. Most of these settings won't be relevant to you unless you're having students log into Engrade in the classroom. Now, if you're interested in having students log into Engrade in the classroom, for example, you can do assessments and so forth. That's definitely something to contact Danielle about. We can facilitate that. But for most of you, these won't be relevant right now. The one setting on this page that's more relevant than any other is the gradebook configuration. And that's this setting here. You have a choice between 4 different gradebook approaches that you can use. Last year in Fremont, you were using the classic gradebook. But this year, if you moved over to rubric-based grading, as the people attending this webinar have, then you want to just keep it on standards-based gradebook. Any of these other gradebooks will mess up your settings. So just keep it on standards-based gradebook. Don't change that one. Okay. I also want to show you a couple things on the standard settings page. So if you remember the grade settings page from last year, this is the same thing but for standards. What we've done here is we've defined 3 different standard scales for the district, an SN plus scale on a 100-point scale, an SN plus scale on a 5-point scale, and a rubric-only scale on a 4-point scale. And the thing to note here is that you should always keep this on rubric-only scale. And when you have that on rubric-only scale, it'll make these choices for you about how a given score corresponds to a color or an overall grade. Basically, this helps round the numbers down and so forth. It also makes this choice here for you on the mastery scale. And it locks the way that the standard score is calculated, and it also locks the default display, but you can change this. There's also a couple options on here. You can change these. This controls which standards you see when you go to tag standards. For most of you, you won't want to mess with these at all. If you're a combo teacher, we may want to make changes here. It's best if you're a combo teacher to approach Danielle. Remember, this is her email, and you can get in touch with her that way, and she can help you set up your grade books so that they work for you as a combo class teacher. So basically, don't mess with this one. Keep it on the rubric-only scale. Okay, last one I want to show you is the teachers page. Now, here's a place where if you co-teach, you can add another teacher. So this is showing that I'm the primary teacher actually here. But if I wanted to add a teacher, let's say I wanted to add Claudine here, and she and I were working together, I could choose Claudine, and I could give her various levels of permission. So I could give her view-only permissions, or a limited edit, or a full edit, or full moderator. Not too much to know there. If you're giving them full moderator status, that's quite a lot of status. Full edit is usually enough. You can see why you might use view-only sometimes. And once you've made those selections, you just click Add User. That's pretty intuitive. But I'm not going to do that because this is my class. All right, one last thing I want to show you. I'm going to go back to the classes page. And let's go into my reading class. Now notice that looking at the reading class, I haven't given any grades yet. So no surprise, there's no grades in here. There's no standard scores. There's no colors. But actually, if you look up here, you'll notice something. It says Select Standard Set, and it's selected Common Core. Now, the thing to know is if you go into your gradebook, the first time that you go into your gradebook, it's going to default to having Common Core here. But that's actually the wrong standard set for every single gradebook. What you want to do is go in here and choose the standard set that matches the gradebook you're in. So if you're in your language gradebook, you'll choose Fremont Language. If you're in your science gradebook, you'll choose Fremont Science. I'm in my reading gradebook, so I choose Fremont Reading. And you'll have to do this for every gradebook the first time you go in. But thereafter, it will remember what you've chosen, and you won't have to choose it again. So I choose Fremont Reading, and you'll watch those things at the top changed, and now I just have the reading standards that Fremont has defined here. Now, these standards are a modification of the Common Core standards, but it's much better to use these, and these are the ones that are going to feed to your report card. So make sure that you change the selected standard sets to the one that matches your gradebook. All right, with that, I think we've avoided the real issue at hand, which is how to create assessments long enough. So let's go to my language gradebook. Notice how I did that. You can go over here and change classes this way at any time. So here we are. We're in my language gradebook. Notice that I've selected Fremont language. It's defaulting to that now. And I want to add an assessment. So you can look around and you see the obvious place to do that is to this little button here that says plus new assessment. So let's do that. I'm going to click on new assessment. Now, for those of you that used Engrade last year, this is going to look pretty familiar. Might even look a little bit simpler in a way, because when you're creating assignments in the classic gradebook, there's a lot more options. But here we're creating a new assessment. So I'm going to give the assessment a name. Let's call it in-class. It's an in-class assessment, and well, this is the 5th one. And it's due today. It's happened today. And then once I've chosen my name, the name of the assessment, and the due date, I select the standard set. So what does that mean? So this assessment is a way for me to record how students have performed on standards. So in order to do that, I need to identify which standards I assess the students on. Okay, straightforward. So I'm going to pick a standard set from which I want to tag standards to this assessment, and then those standards that I've tagged, that's the one I'm going to get to give scores to students on. So you can see I have all these standard sets available to me. The rule here is the same as it was on the other screen, right? It will initially default to Common Core, but after you select, it'll start defaulting to the correct one. If I'm in my language gradebook, I'm going to use the language standard set. Similarly, if I'm in the science gradebook, I'm going to use the science standard set. So know that. That's straightforward. But just remember, match the standard set to the name of the gradebook. So I'm choosing my language gradebook standard here. And then once I've chosen the standard set, I have to actually tag the standards. So let's click here, and I'll show you how to tag standards. When I initially go to tag standards, it'll be in a folder. There'll be a top-level folder. These are going to be folders of standards. I'm going to start opening them up and seeing what standards are inside. So the top level will be a grade level folder. So for most of you, it'll just match your grade. So if you're in a 2nd grade class, it'll say 2nd grade here. If you're in a 5th grade class, it'll say 5th grade. Combo teachers are going to do something a little bit different. And for that, contact Danielle. So here's what I do. I just click this little triangle, see where that is? And it opens up this folder. And you can see there's 2 more folders. So for Fremont language standards in 3rd grade, there's 2 kind of categories of standards: conventions of standard English, and then the other category is vocabulary acquisition and use and knowledge of language. So I'm going to click this triangle out of curiosity, and I see it opens up another level, and now it's reached the final level. These are 2 standards that I can tag. They're related to conventions of standard English. And if I click that one over here for vocabulary, it opens that up for vocabulary acquisition. If I click these triangles again, it closes them. See that? And the other thing that I can do here is I can click these boxes. Now, if I were to click submit now, it would tag this assignment to these 2 standards. The other thing I can do is I can click on all the standards like that. Get like this. I can also press this button. See if I'm just come in and I see only 3rd grade and I press this button down here. It opens them all up. If I press it again, it closes them all. I can also select other standard sets here. And then the other thing that I can do is, if I want to find something in my standard set and I can't remember where it is, now that's not going to happen here. There's only a few standards, but you can imagine with a big standard set, you would need this. Let's say I want to find a standard that has the word vocabulary in it. I start typing VOC, and immediately, as I type, it's narrowing it down, and it shows me which standards include what I'm trying to find. So when you're selecting standards, this is a great way to learn the structure of your standards. By doing this and looking at the way they're foldered, you'll start to get how the standards are structured and kind of the logical structure to them. And that'll help you a lot later when you're tagging things. Hopefully by the end of trimester 2, trimester 3, this is second nature to you. So I'm going to click these 2 standards, the 1st and 3rd standard, and I'm going to go ahead and submit. And when I do that, it shows me here on the assignment page which standards I picked, just to remind me. Hopefully eventually these codes become intuitive. And I can put a description in here. I can say a group activity, you could certainly add more than that. Once I'm done with that, I click Enter Assessments. And it takes me to this screen, and it gives me the opportunity to put scores in for the students on the 2 standards that I selected. If I selected 3 standards, there'd be another column here with the 3rd standard. If I selected 1, it would just be 1 column, and so forth. Now here's a key step. If you want, you can plan out your assignments ahead of time, and you can put in an assignment. I could put an assignment in for a week from today on the 15th, and I could put that in here. When I got to this page, I would just save blank scores, right? And what that would do is I would see on the calendar that I had made that assignment, and I would see in another screen that I had planned to cover these standards, but I wouldn't have entered the scores yet. And then later, I would go back and enter the scores. But this was today. It was in class, so I'm going to go ahead and enter scores. And let me show you how that looks. So Annie's our star student. She got a 4 on both aspects of this assignment. Austin got a 3 and a 4. Heidi got a 4 and a 4. Now, Kevin didn't do so hot. In fact, everybody did pretty badly from here on out on this first standard. And then over here, the students actually did very well on this second standard. And once I've done that, you can see it's already color coding these for me. It's computed an average for the class. I can see that my students in my class are more than a full point better on this standard than they are on this standard. And so I'm already getting instant feedback on, hey, if I'm going to reteach or reemphasize, I'm going to go back and work on this standard. That's where my students need it. And I can save my scores. And that's it. I've done it. I've entered an assessment. Now, once I enter the assessment, it takes me back to this screen, which is the overall summary of how students have done. Remember, I assessed on this score and this score. And just to show you what that looks like, let's go here to Kevin, and let's click. See this cell here? This is one of the standards I assessed. I'm going to click it. And it shows me all the different times that Kevin has been assessed on 3.L.4. And you can see here at the bottom, he is assessed as having a 3 in that standard on today, Thursday, January 8th. So that's pretty cool. So you can start to see it's affecting his score, what happened today. All right, let's go back. I want to just revisit that assignment and cover a couple other things. There's another screen here called the assignment screen. You can get to know it. We're not going to cover it too much today because we have a lot to cover. When I go back to this assessment, I want to point out a few things. So first is I can actually give too high of a score here. And Engrade will allow that. So we allow you that freedom so that if you want to do extra credit and so forth, you can. Now, it's district policy not to do that. You should not be giving a higher than a 4. But because Engrade has to work for many different school systems, we've allowed this and we can't restrict it. So just know that you can go over a 4. You shouldn't. If you see a really absurdly high standard score for a student, probably what's happened is you accidentally entered, a 44 instead of a 4, and that's affected their score average. The other thing to know is that you can actually go negative here, and you can put a 0 in. So for instance, I can put a 0 in. Now, Fremont is working on a 1 to 4 scale. So if a student turns in good faith, their work on a given assignment, you should give them at least a 1. Hold on a second. So you should give them at least a 1 if they've made a good faith effort. But you can give them a 0, and one way to use a 0, and this is up to you, is you can use it to identify missing work. So if you put a 0 here on that standard, it's like saying, oh, Heidi didn't turn it in. And that will affect the student's grade, but it helps you to go back in later and you can see, well, if Heidi's mom asks, why is she not getting a better grade, you can say, well, she's missing these 2 assignments, and then she can turn those in and get a more accurate assessment of her knowledge of that standard. So you can do that. The other thing that you can do is you can actually leave these blank. You need to leave it blank at the time of grading. If you leave it blank at the time of grading, it doesn't affect the student one way or the other. So if Heidi was getting a 3.3 in this standard and I left her grade here blank, then she would continue to get a 3.3 and her grade on this assessment wouldn't factor in because she wouldn't have one. All right, I'm gonna not save scores in this instance. I want to show you two other things. So I'm going to go to my my science class and my social science class. And I'm going to show you something. So essentially the thing to know here is that the English language arts and mathematics standards are very well established. They've been hashed out very well at the national and at the state level, and they're agreed upon. But the science and the history and social science standards are more in flux. They haven't been as widely adopted, and they're not, official effectively. And so there's less detail across districts in science and the history and social science standards, and that's true also at Fremont. So the impact to you is if you're creating a science assignment, so let's just call this lab 1, and I've selected the correct standard here in my science class. I'm going to go to Tag Standards in Science, and I open it up, and I see just 3 standards. Fine, no problem. But basically, if you look at the report card, you'll see that the report card has an overall grade, and then it has 2 lines beneath it. One is this line, demonstrates understanding of the content concepts, and the other is participation in lab. So the thing to know is that this is going to be, your report card will be set up a little bit differently for science and history. And the most important thing here is, and we've noted it here in parentheses, is that if you want an assignment to count towards a student's overall grade, then you need to tag this first standard. Anything that's not tagged to that first standard won't count towards their overall grade in science. And then you can elect to tag these other 2 as you like, and they'll pull into the report card according to what information they have. But the most important thing is if you want an assessment to affect a student's overall grade, click here. I think that's a good time also to mention that all assessments count equally in the standards-based system. So if you assess a student for just 5 minutes on a standard, and you give them a 4 in the gradebook, and then later you conduct a thorough assessment of students on a standard, and it's for like 60 minutes, and you put a 3 in the gradebook. Well, that 3 for the long assessment and that 4 for the short assessment, they count equally. The principle being that the length of the assessment is not as important as what information you got out, and so in both instances, you found out something about the student. But the thing to know is you can't weight the assessment. But there's a way to compensate for that, and I'll show you that later. So as with science, it's the same in history. So if I'm in my social science class, and you'll notice, look, it's on a Common Core standard set, so I need to go ahead and pick history, social science for my social science class. If I want to create a new assessment, it's going to be the same deal. When I go to Tag Standards and I open them up, I'm going to see just this overall tag and this other tag about content concepts. So anything that you want to count towards the overall student grade in history, social science, you need to tag this first standard. And just remember, you can read the standard, and there's a reminder there of that. All right, a couple more things. We're moving along good. Let's go back to the language gradebook. So you saw how we created the assessment. You can see now that a student's overall score on a standard is an average of their scores. So this is Heidi here has a 2, a 2, a 1, a 1, and a 4. If you add that all up, that's, when we do the math, that's 10 across 5 assignments, so it's an average of 2, exactly 2.0. And if I go over here and I hover over here, it'll show me her scores too, and her mastery score is also 2, right? And you can see that with other assignments. Here's a 2.8. If we click on it, we'll see 3, 4, 3, 1, 3. If you average those, you get 2.8. And then on this screen, that's rounded down to show a 2. This rounded down number is what gets pulled into the report card, and I'll show you that in a minute. But now something that may happen to you is you may say, I don't want to see this 2. You know, Kevin's got a 2.8, Heidi's got a 2. In my gradebook, it kind of looks like their understanding of the standard is equal, but it looks like Kevin understands it significantly better, and he's on the cusp of getting a 3. So that might be information you would want as a teacher. Totally understandable. Let me show you how you get it. So what you do is you go over here to this filter button, click that filter button. This you're probably going to ignore. You probably want to ignore this usually, this drop down as well. But when you get down to the display line here, it says mastery. So that's what display is deciding, hey, what are you displaying in this color-coded area? And right now it's displaying mastery, which is the rounded down version of the score. But if you wanted to see the score, you can come here, select score, and filter your results. And now I see 2.8 to 2.5, 2.3, 2. See, you know, here Heidi had 2.3, 2.5, 2.0, right, 2. And before, when you're looking at mastery, it just looked like 2s across the board. But now there's a little more texture here. We can see, actually, on these first 2 standards doing better. These are the ones that really need extra work, right? And here with Kevin, we start to see the texture here, too. He's on the cusp with this standard, and he needs a lot of work over here. So just remember, you can go right here and filter and do that. I'm going to change it back, and then while I'm here, I'm going to show you a couple other options. We're not going to be able to display these quite right, but you've got this assessed option. Right now, it's showing what this is it's saying, which standards should I display? And right now, I've got it set to show all, so it's showing all the standards in language, whether I've assessed them or not. Now, we could imagine, you notice that I've covered all 4 standards in language with the different assignments I've given, and that's why everybody has a score for every single standard. But you could imagine a situation in which I've only covered, say, the first 2 standards. In which case, if I had only covered the first 2 standards, I could select this covered option. It says standards that at least one student has been assessed for. If I click this green button, filter results, it's going to only show me the standards I had covered. Similarly, if I chose not covered, then when I click the green button, it will only show me the standards that I haven't covered. Planned and not planned is like covered and not covered, except that an assignment is considered planned if you have created an assignment that's tagged to those standards, whether you put scores in or not. So remember, we talked about earlier, you could put an assignment in here for Thursday, January 15th. You wouldn't have scores for it yet. But if you had tagged a standard in that assignment, then that standard would be among the planned standards. So you can use these in the same way. So if you want to plan out, that's a good way to make sure you hit all your standards. So like with mathematics, where there's 10, 12 standards, you can use these to your advantage for your planning purposes. So I'm going to cancel out. There's an option here too. You probably don't want to mess with this year until you're feeling really comfortable with standards. But once you do, try it out. You can always turn it off. You also have the option to do some different printing things here. And you can click on these standards to find out, the nature of the standard and see how students are doing. But visit these print reports here to see these. Will solve some different problems for you. For instance, if I want to print student reports, this gives me reports for each student. So that was Annie here, Austin, Heidi. It shows how they're doing on those different standards. So if you, for instance, are having conferences, this can be a way if you want to just review a particular gradebook to do this. So there's a couple different reports. They solve some common problems. Try to familiarize yourself with them if you're looking for that. There's also this assignments view. We visited it very briefly earlier. Let's go here and I'll show you a little bit more about it. What assignments does is provide you an overall summary of how you're doing as far as what percentage of standards have been mastered by the students. So you can see that most students in my class have partial mastery, and some have adequate fully mastered. And then it also has coverage of how many standards have I covered, what percentage have I covered, what percentage have I planned. The other thing you can do is you can create new assignments from the screen, and then you can see the different assignments you have. So if you want to change the scores on an assignment, you come over here to the assignment screen, and you find the assignment that you want to change the scores on. And then you can do that by going over here to the right and click Enter Standard Scores. You can also edit the assignment. That would be like editing the name or the date it was due. You can copy this assignment to other classes. And these are some other options. You can delete it. You can open this thing called turn-ins, which I don't think is too relevant right now. The other thing you can do is tag additional standards. So if I click this, it shows me the standards that I've tagged. And I can actually tag another standard, save this, and then the students would all have blanks in that standard, but I could go back and enter standard scores. Pretty straightforward. I think if you fiddle around with this a little bit, you'll find it's intuitive. All right, last thing I'd like to cover today is just how all of this flows into the report card. Let's go back to the student summary view. So by now you should be getting a sense for how you enter assessments. All those assessments aggregate into an average score, right? Score of 3.5, and then that's rounded down to a whole number, right? And then that's going to get pulled into the report cards. So let me pull up Alex's fake report cards here, and I'll show you what it looks like. And I want you to keep one thing in mind. Because we're doing a change to the way that the grade books are working for these schools in the middle of the year, we built your grade books out, but Fremont and Engrade are working together to build the report cards. So your report cards are not available right now. They will be available at least 4 weeks before the end of trimester 2. And once they become available, we will offer a refresher webinar where we'll go through all the specifics of using report cards and remind you of how to use those, or if you're a new teacher, teach you for the first time. So just know they're not ready yet, but I'm going to preview how that works for you so you can have in mind when you're giving students assessment grades, this is how this is going to affect their overall grade. So to get to report cards, as always, go up here to Apps, click on Report Cards. It gives you the classes that are relevant to the grade level and that you have. Click View Classes, and it shows me my classes. I'm going to click the language one. In fact, clicking any one of these will take me to the same place. Click this, and it shows me my students. I can print PDFs of their report card, but for now, I'm just going to click on the student and open the Dynamic Report Card tool where I enter scores. And what I want to show you is, so at the beginning of this demo, if we had looked at Austin's scores, we would have seen that Austin had a 3, a 3, a 2, and a 3 for his standard scores. And what happens is, for his mastery scores, right? And then so what happens is, overnight, in the middle of the night, Engrade pulls all that data from the gradebook, right? Goes into the gradebook, essentially, and it finds Austin. He's moved up a little bit here since we added that assignment, but pulls his data in, right? And then puts it in here. And that green in the cell indicates that data is being pulled in live. And then at the same time, after it pulls in that data, then what it does is it calculates an average. So it takes these 4 scores, right, and it averages them, and it puts them in the overall language grade. So now you can see this report card's pretty empty. This is just for demonstration purposes, but that's how this whole thing will work. So you'll be down here in reading, you'll have grades for all of these standards, and then it'll get averaged here to give an overall grade. So that's how this works. You create assessments, all of the assessments for a given standard for a given student, so all of Austin's assessments on this standard are averaged together to give him an overall score. That overall score, in this case a 3, but you can imagine others where it's like 2.8, that score is rounded down to give a mastery score, so that's the mastery score here at 3. That mastery score is pulled into the report card next to the standard it belongs to, right? So you can see there's the 3s, the 2s, right? And then all their mastery scores are averaged together to give them an overall score for the class. That's the way this whole process works from start to finish to get overall grades from standard grades. So now I want to talk about 3 more things on this and then we'll be done. So the first is you can always change a grade in here if you want. So you can always put in like a 2, right? Like I might come in here and when I'm reviewing my report cards, I realize like, yeah, Austin got a 3, right? But, you know, I really don't think he's actually a 3. I think he's a 2, and I can change it. And now, if at a later date I say, hey, you know what? No, I trust my gradebook. I want the gradebook to pull in the grade from the gradebook. All I have to do that is just clear this 2 out, and then the next midnight, this will get pulled in and it'll pull in the gradebook. But as long as I type that 2 in there, Engrade's not going to replace that with data from the gradebook. The other thing to know is, as long as I put numbers in here, I can put a 4 here, for example. Even though these ones are coming from the gradebook and these ones I hand entered, these will still get averaged and they'll still generate an overall grade. The other thing to know is a couple things on district policy. You could come in here and put a 2.2, for example, for this standard. However, the district policy is that the standard grades for these standards here should be whole numbers, meaning no decimal point. So 2.2 is not okay, 2.1 is not okay, but a 2 is okay. And remember, it should run 1 to 4 unless the student's missing work, in which case you could have a lower score. The other thing to know is that up here in overall grade, you can also always change the overall grade. You're the teacher, it's your discretion. So I could say, hey, you know what, Austin overall really deserves a 3.3 in language. I know his grades worked out kind of in this way here, but he's actually pretty strong. You can do that. Again, there's constraints. It should be somewhere between 0 and 4, hopefully 1 and 4, unless the student's missing work. But here a decimal is okay, 1 decimal. If you put like a 3.99, which I just tried to type, it won't fit. Don't do that. Just 1 decimal. And I think by convention, it might be good if you're going to put a 4, put a 4.0 so that it's consistent with the other overall grades on the report card that also have decimal points. And same as the other cells, if I wanted to clear these out and let Engrade do all the automatic computation it did before, I just delete anything I've written in there. The cell will turn yellow, and that indicates that that data will be pulled in again overnight. Now, a question we were asked before is, can you use only report cards and not the gradebook? Use only Engrade's report cards and not use the Engrade gradebook? And the answer is that's absolutely okay. In which case, if you did that, what you would come in here, if you didn't use the gradebook at all, right, you would come in here and you would find a bunch of empty cells, and you would just type in your grades. And Engrade would save those as you did it, and you'd be all set. So, you know, whether you're keeping a gradebook or not, you could just on the fly remember what you thought the student did in this area. It's really up to you, but that's how you can do this. The last is, if a student has an IEP, you can always put a star here to indicate that. And you see there's a notation on the report card, I don't remember where it is, about that, but you can put an asterisk in here if you want. You can even put a letter, but just try to stick to what the district considers okay for these marks. All right, with that, I think I've covered just about everything. There's a frequently asked questions document that we've built out that Danielle has and can supply to you. And as always, let's go back here. Don't forget, you have help. You can go to these, 4 places, I guess, for help if you need it, and we're happy to do so. So have a good evening. Thanks very much.